This is Suzanne Wagner, and I'm doing my personal quote and blog for the 13th of September 2022. My quote for today: Magic happened, and the ethers opened doors. I found my family's ancestral home and touched the walls and walked on her floors. Such moments are worthy of an Irish tale. Tears flowed, and we celebrated with a good ale. The Irish cherish the joys even when they are not their own. They understand the value of family and the power of home. So, my blog for today. Yesterday was the grand adventure that made my trip complete. We drove for an hour from our hotel to Donegal, in Donegal, and made it to Creesla. My family always pronounced it Creesla, but that seemed to not be the correct pronunciation in the Irish culture until we go to that town. Then we discovered that in that town, that is exactly how they did pronounce it. Funny how certain things are passed down correctly. We did not know where to begin, so we started at the graveyard by the old church to look at the gravestones for the McFaddens, which is the maiden name of my great-grandmother before she married a Peters. Peters is not a common Irish name, but McFadden is a very common name in Creesla. I have to give big compliments to our amazing driver, Sharon, for her determined nature and willingness to ask questions to anyone and everyone in the town. She has been a godsend on our trip. So, as we were poking around a graveyard, she was willing to talk to anyone to see if they knew the house whose picture I had or where the McFaddens might be found. One very nice Irish gentleman who came on Sunday to speak to his dead relatives at the graveyard suggested an area to go to over by Doe Castle, which was just a couple of miles down the road, and that was sort of the McFadden area. So off we went and discovered an amazing 13th century fort-like castle filled with history, and perfectly located on a point where it had a grand view of a bay that fills when the tide comes in. We were just leaving and we saw a small coffee shop that was selling prints. And Sharon asked if we wanted to go in for a coffee and ask if they might know anything. We backed up the car, got out, and ordered coffee, and I bought a print while I told the story to the woman at the counter. She immediately said, I will call my husband to see if he might know the house, as he was born in this area and had family that lived here for centuries also. She did not hesitate and called him, and he was over in 5 minutes. Seems he loves Americans and such fond treasure hunts. He was wonderful and said there was an area that the McFaddens had owned for over a century, and he knew of some old houses up that hill and in that area, only a mile or so away. So we all got into our car and drove the most narrow streets I have ever seen and came upon one old house that did not feel right, but it was close, and the area felt familiar to my bones. But I knew that something was right about it, and we drove literally a few hundred more feet, and down a small hill was this old house. The lovely man guiding us from Doe Castle said this might be it. He got the picture and went to the next door house to speak to anyone, but there was no one home. So we went down the hill to this old house, and it was amazing to see the short doors, and the spacing of the chimneys was correct. But what cinched it was that there was an old handmade gate, and that was the gate. Exactly. Such a gate was made over 150 years ago, and there it was, still standing, and the bricks that were on either side of the gate were also exact. He went to the other side of the fence to take a picture in the field from the angle that the old picture was taken, and there it was. Perfect. Not a stone out of place, not a detail had changed, and I couldn't help but cry. While we could not go into the house, we peeked into the windows and saw the old fireplace in the internal spaces. The synchronicity that came together for us to find this house was its own miracle. From the man at the graveyard to guide us to the castle, to the coffee house woman whose husband knew this land and every house upon that land so that he could find the roads that no one else would have found, and then to the house itself, still standing grand and strong from the hard work and determined nature of my ancestors. It's amazing to find anything still standing and working 150 years in the past. We laughed and cried. It was a powerful moment, and I could feel the ancestors celebrating the return home of their offspring and family. Then we returned that man back to his car at Doe Castle and to his wife at the coffee shop. I ran out of the car and said to her, "We found my great grandmother's house." And I gave her this huge hug, at which point she burst into tears also. I told her that her husband was a magical man and that we could not have done it without him. And she smiled so proudly at her husband. I just love the Irish. They celebrate the joys with the fullness that too often we forget. It was so special and a marvelous adventure, one that I am sure we could not have figured out alone. So I know that the angels and the guides and the ancestors were all helping no matter what. I thought the town of Creslaw was small, but it had obviously grown a lot in 150 years. Our guide told us that that land would have been good land in the old days. The house was built under a hill, so it was protected from the wind. It was near a water source because there was a small pond just below. But our Irish guide said that this land would have been the worst for the potato blight because of its dampness. Hence, 7 out of the 8 children ended up leaving to go to America. I could feel my heart was happy. My ancestors were celebrating above, and all things in the universe were complete. Thanks, everyone.